There was something about walking up to Highbury on a Saturday in the 70s or 80s that made your stomach churn. Not nerves about the result, though that mattered too, but the buzz in the air, the edge in people's eyes, the knowledge that the game wasn't just being played on the pitch. It was in the streets, in the terraces, in the underground before and after. For Arsenal fans, the matchday experience back then was part football, part battleground. You didn't just go to watch, you went to stand up for your club. Chapter 1. The walk to Highbury. Match days started early, sometimes too early. The lads would gather near Finsbury Park or Arsenal tube station, blending into the tide of red and white pouring down Gillespie Road. We weren't in colours though, not most of the time. It was the casual era, Lacoste, Adidas Forest Hills, Sergio Tacchini. Smart gear, but hard lads. Finsbury Park was a proper meeting point. You'd clock who was about. Sometimes it was 30 of us, sometimes 300. Word would spread fast if it was going to kick off, especially if it was West Ham, Spurs or Chelsea in town. The ICF, the headhunters, the yids, each brought their own reputation, and that made us sharpen ours. We had our own firms, the Herd, the Gooners, the Highbury Mob, and the younger element coming through. North Bank was our spiritual home, but the real battles, they started well before we hit the turnstiles. 2. The roads around the ground. Blackstock Road, Seven Sisters, Drayton Park. These were front-line zones. You might hear that a mob of away fans was drinking in a pub they shouldn't have been. So we'd go. Sometimes it was pre-arranged. Loose words shared the week before, or even the night before in the phone boxes, or in letters in fanzines like the Gooner. More often, it was about instinct. You saw faces, you knew the drill. Some away fans would be attacked, leaving the coaches' park and returning to them. Another mob would be waiting to attack on the streets, leading up to both tube stations. It was sometimes chaotic and enthralling at the same time. I remember one game against Birmingham in '82. Zulus were up. We heard they were drinking down by Holloway Road. A group of us headed down, 50 or so. They weren't expecting a welcome party. Pint glasses, stools, fists. It went off. The old Bill turned up late as usual, nicked a few, and that was that. The worst was always when West Ham came. The ICF were no mugs. There was one infamous Saturday in '81 when they took the North Bank, or tried to. Came mob-handed, early doors in through the side turnstiles. Took some ground. But we weren't having it. We regrouped near the back of the North Bank and came down in force. Fists, boots, whatever we could grab. It was like a war zone. Police came steaming in with truncheons and dogs, but the damage was done. Blood on the steps. West Ham scarpered. 3. Inside the ground. The North Bank. Inside Highbury, it was different. Tight, intense, old school. The North Bank was where you made your voice heard. Sometimes it's where you became a legend. Johnny Hoy, Jenkins, Denton, Terry Steele, all heroes of mine because they dominated the North Bank, like generals leading their men into battle. That's who I followed into battle. I always remember, even though the North Bank was packed tight, there was one guy who sold peanuts and seemed to have the ability to just float past all the sardines packed in. Everyone just moved out of the way for him, like he was some sort of Jedi warrior. Weird. You'd watch the police band, whose leader would throw up his baton really high, then catch it. He never dropped it, not once, so professional. But sometimes, the away firm would be in the North Bank before you. Then it was our job to get them out, usually led by our leader Denton, a big black guy who took no prisoners. West Ham and Spurs used to take the North Bank regularly. There, I've admitted it, the carnal sin by an Arsenal fan, telling this truth. Between 75 and 81, Spurs were always in the North Bank. Sometimes they stayed all match. Sometimes we would manage to shift them, but with them being so organised, they would get in early, and once in, it was difficult to shift them. So sometimes we would take it to them outside, sometimes we would get a result, sometimes not. Dark days, really, when I think back. Wish it never happened. But it did. 81. The fight back started. We regrouped and pushed them onto the pitch, and they had to retreat to other areas of the ground. Never again would they take the North Bank. West Ham also had their share of taking the North Bank. The smoke bomb incident of 82 being the most famous, where we retook the North Bank from them after we let off a smoke bomb and attacked them amid the confusion. So from 1982, nobody ever took the North Bank again, although several tried. We had become more organized. 4. Inside the ground pitch invasions. There weren't too many full-scale pitch invasions usually. It was Spurs getting pushed onto the pitch as in the story earlier, and Villa after their title celebrations of 81. I know there was a full-scale invasion and riot at the Rangers game, but that was before my time in 1967 apparently. I can't remember us going onto the pitch at Highbury. It was sacred ground really, so that's probably why. I remember the Aston Villa one. They won the league at our place, and their fans invaded the pitch to celebrate. 81 I think it was. Well, we weren't having that, were we, celebrating on our beloved turf, so the North Bank went onto the pitch to meet them. After a few skirmishes, they retreated back into the clock end, tails between their legs, while we taunted them from the pitch. Great memories. 5. Inside the ground, the clock end. But sometimes, if you really wanted it, you'd head for the clock end. Arsenal's away end. You could get in early, mix in, wait for the away mob to arrive. That's where the brave or stupid lads went. Chelsea 74 or 75. Boxing Day I think it was. My first time in the clock end. We battered them so bad, they had to leave the ground, hiding their scarves as they went. Forest in 79. Clock end was full of their lot, all mouthy, giving it large. We were 10 or 15, scattered. Then on a signal, we came together. It went off, fists flying, knees in backs, heads crashing. The stewards just watched at first. Then the Met came crashing in. We didn't always win. Nobody did. Against Millwall in 78, they came up in force, steamrolled down Highbury Hill, sent a few of us packing. South London lads were animals. No fear, no backing down. Another time, Wolves at Highbury, FA Cup around 78, they had huge following, and it was kicking off in the clock end all game. But to make things worse, Chelsea headhunters arrived after their game was postponed. It was mayhem in the clock end. Running battles ensued, but we were watching from the North Bank. So at full time, we all went round to the clock end exit. Wolves wouldn't come out, we just stood there goading them, but they wouldn't budge from the safety of their end. Lost respect for their firm then, as I had heard good things about them, but this day they didn't want to know. Then we went round to the other clock end exit to find Chelsea who were waiting for us. Great punch-up, which ended when the coppers came and spoilt the fun. Shame as we were well on top, with Chelsea backing off. But Arsenal weren't soft either. By the early 80s, our lot had proper numbers. Young gooners were everywhere, fast, angry, with a point to prove. Spurs were the biggest target. The North London derby wasn't just a game. It was a test of pride. Still is. 6. The derby days. Tottenham away was madness. You never knew if you'd get in, let alone out. Trains from King's Cross would be packed with Old Bill, and we'd split up to avoid getting kettled, meet at Bruce Grove or Seven Sisters. Arsenal lads went in small groups, then came together near the ground. In 84 it kicked off big in Tottenham High Road. We had about 200. They had similar. Bottles, bricks, punches. It was straight chaos. People say the game ended 2 each, but none of us remembered the score. What mattered was we'd shown up. Back at Highbury, they tried to do the same. Came up through Arsenal Station, trying to take the piss. Didn't work. We had the territory. Round the back of the tube station, near the old pie shop. That's where we held the line. Any Spurs who were there that day know, they know we battered them. Not for the first and certainly not the last time. 7. The fashion, the fear, the family. Being a football hooligan in those days wasn't just about the fighting. It was about belonging, the buzz, the fashion, knowing the codes. You didn't just swing punches, you knew when to run, when to stand, who to trust. It was part of growing up. The terraces were where lads became men. You learnt to spot a face. Is he one of ours? Is he clocking us? Who's watching who? We weren't proud of every fight. Sometimes people got badly hurt. Sometimes it got out of hand. We saw blades now and then. Some lads ended up in hospital, others in prison, others dead. The police were no joke either. The SPG would come down hard, boots, batons, dogs, and if you were nicked, good luck. But still we went, week after week. 8. Highbury's last war cries. By the late 80s, things started changing. CCTV, banning orders, more undercover work. The mobs thinned out. The casual scene faded. Hillsborough, Heysel, football changed. So did the crowd. But if you stood on the North Bank in those days, shoulder to shoulder, heart pounding, waiting for the away fans to appear, you'll never forget it. The rush, the fear, the pride. It wasn't just a game, it was Arsenal. In 1991, following the Taylor Report, work began to convert Highbury into an all-seater stadium. A new two-tier North Bank stand was opened in 1993, providing seating for 12,000 spectators, and also housing a shop and museum. Other modernizations have followed, including the introduction of 2 huge screens and electric scoreboards. In 2006, Arsenal played its last game at Highbury, beating Wigan 4-2 and stealing a Champions League place from under the nose of arch-rivals Spurs. It was a fitting tribute to a great old stadium. I was there, now seated in the North Bank, in what were probably the most emotional scenes of my life, and that includes marrying my wife and having children and grandchildren. That's how much Arsenal means to me. Everything. 9. Arsenal away. I have so many stories of following Arsenal away, we need another video. We thank Graham for his recollections. Arsenal were a very underrated firm, in my honest opinion. Probably because people saw the taking of their North Bank as some sort of weakness. But as someone said, maybe they took the North Bank because all of our real fighters were waiting for them in the clock end. Anyway, thanks for watching. Now please comment, share, like and subscribe, as it really helps our channel grow.